Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we have the recap of the Milwaukee Regionals, which was a massive event with about 1,600 players, and we saw some crazy results here with some crazy decks that made day 2 and even placed pretty well into the top 16. Going into the event, no surprise, Gardevoir is one of the biggest threats out there, and same with Dragapult. These kind of are the top 2 decks in the format, with Dragapult being the more popular choice, but Gardevoir being the more dominant, it seems like. We've just kind of seen Gardevoir win a lot of regionals up until this point. Dragapult is a lot more common, we're seeing it kind of everywhere, but it has yet to really take a massive regional. And to everyone's surprise, it was actually Raging Bolt that managed to take the entire event. A deck that a lot of people have said is pretty bad right now in the format, but when you kind of look at how this tournament broke down, it kind of makes sense as to why it did good. So today I want to kind of talk about how the tournament went, what some of the top decks were in this tournament, and some of the crazy surprises that we saw in day 2. So as I mentioned, Raging Bolt managed to take the entire event here, and looking at the top 8 is kind of an interesting one. Now Christian was actually on stream quite a few times. I was watching his match against Brent's Gardevoir. It was a really close one, and game 3 was kind of a donk, like one turn knockout kind of situation. But overall, it was a really cool list to kind of see. He does actually play the Slitherwing and also the baby Raging Bolts, which put in a lot of work. I feel like every time I turned the stream on and he was playing on stream, it was the baby Raging Bolt kind of just putting in the work there. So it seems like that was definitely a big piece of this deck. The Slitherwing, of course, is there for the Pikachu matchup, especially like in Terra Box. Really good at just kind of beating that, and I guess especially in Joltik Box, since it's very popular now, so it makes sense to kind of include both into this deck. Two really good one prize options. Obviously, you know, in a lot of games you're going to use one over the other, but sometimes you could find yourself using both if you needed to. And again, it's just a really good single prize attacker that kind of gets you out of situations and allows you to just kind of keep that lead and keep putting the pressure on. Aside from that, it is a pretty typical list, I would say. They are playing 1 Jamming Tower here and 2 Area 0. Jamming Tower is obviously very good in this meta right now. There's a lot of tool cards out there and not a lot of stadiums and a lot of decks, so being able to shut those tool cards down can be very annoying to your opponent. We do have the 1 copy of Judge, which I think is a really good card in this deck, and we've also got the Mew here to be able to draw some more cards. And again, this deck does do pretty good against some of these slower decks, which are kind of dominating the format. Unlike some other decks that really rely on items, you can kind of get going, you know, turn 2 here with just Professor Sawdust. So if your first turn, if you can already discard some energies and get that going, get your Ogerpon set up, then you can pretty much start swinging like turn 2 already and just start taking knockouts and just never look back. And by having that Mew and Fezandipity on your board, it basically makes sure that, you know, if you get Iono'd or Unfair Stamped, you do have a way to kind of draw out of it. And same thing with having the Hoot Hoops, obviously. In second place, we did have just pure Dragapult here, which right now is kind of the popular way to play this Pokemon. I will say there is a pretty decent split between just standard Dragapult and then Dragapult Dusknoir, so it was kind of split for this event. I feel like leading up to it, we've just been seeing like pure Dragapult and less Dusknoir. I do think that both builds are really good. I do think that this build is the more consistent build, but I also think that the Dusknoir build kind of helps with certain matchups where you might kind of struggle in. But overall, pretty solid list right here. Pretty straightforward. There was a list a couple weeks ago or last week that just kind of ran like 4 of every supporter and had like no items. This one here kind of relies more on tool cards, has a wide range of supporters, and then also item cards like that energy search to be able to find a specific energy and not have to discard anything else. So just really overall pretty solid build here. I personally like to have a Super Rod in this deck. I know most people don't play that, but we do have 3 Night Stretchers here, which is, you know, more than enough as far as recovery goes. So overall, really solid options here. You got plenty of ways to get Pokemon out. And that Genesect just puts in a lot of work. It's a card that we're starting to see in multiple decks now. Our highest place in Joltik Box here did get 3rd place, and watching this game on stream was also kind of interesting. The player definitely made some mistakes here. Unfortunately, there was a game where they had Genesect on the bench. Pretty much their only way out was to prevent like the Prime Catcher from being played on the other side, and they forgot to attach the tool card that was in their hand. It was kind of a long shot to win that game, but at least gave them a chance, it felt like, and they did forget to do that, unfortunately. They are opting to play the Iron Leaves, which a lot of people have been cutting, and I will say, looking at Joltik Box, I've seen some really cool lists. Most notably, I'd say would be the Volcanion, which I'll kind of explain if I get to see that deck down here. But I do think the Iron Leaves, it's not really that necessary, I feel like. I think if Charizard became more popular, it would make more sense. I guess it's good for like Zoroark as well. every time I play this deck on live, I always start with just Iron Leaves, and it's so annoying. So maybe I'm just traumatized from that. But yeah, aside from that, pretty solid list here. We're playing no stadiums in this list. We're playing one Night Stretcher, which I think is good to have some recovery options. But again, no stadiums here, so that could be kind of a problem into some other decks. In 4th and 5th, we have some Dragapult Dusknoir here, nothing out of the ordinary. Again, we're seeing like 2 builds of Dragapult here. This one being the Dusknoir build. This one here is actually kind of interesting because they are also playing the Monkey Dory and Pokemon League headquarters, so that's pretty cool. But aside from that, pretty, standard list, I would say. But the most interesting deck, in my opinion, in top 8 is Ian Robb with the Flareon deck here, which we get to see multiple times on stream. Really interesting deck here that I think is actually very good into this meta. It makes a lot of sense. It's got really good matchups. Flareon, for example, has that Burning Charge, which does 130 damage, and you get to accelerate energy. Keep in mind there's Pokemon like Goldango that are weak to fire and have 260 HP. That means you can knock them out with your weaker attack and also accelerate energy, which can be very good. Sylveon here, you can be very annoying with Angelite and make them shuffle their Pokemon back into the deck. You also do have Magical Charm, which conveniently with Clefairy will actually knock out a Dragapult EX. So again, very good in that matchup as well. The harder matchup is going to be Gardevoir, and I believe Ian did say that he didn't run into any Gardevoir leading up to top 8, so pretty much smooth sailing from there, not really running into any troubles. And you got the Noctowl engine, of course. You've got ways to get EVs out pretty easily. So overall, a really consistent deck that can be annoying and also has really solid matchups into some of the best decks in the format right now. The last slot in top 8 did go to Brent Tonneson here with the Gardevoir, kind of just running it back from all the previous events. Again, Gardevoir, very solid deck right now in the format. A very high skill deck, so we see a lot of top players playing this deck here. And it's just overall really strong. Like, you look at it, and it seems like it lost a lot from, pre-rotation, but it's still just kind of up there with all the other decks. And it just kind of has a lot of answers. It is opting to play the Cleffa, which is a really good card to, draw cards if you just have a bad hand. So a really good option aside from just Badoo. And yeah, just a very solid list overall. That's kind of a recap right there of the top 8. But looking into the top 16, you will see that we do have 3 Ends Zoroark decks here, and this is one of the first interesting decks, aside from the Flareon obviously, that did really well at this event. Just kind of scrolling down here, you'll see that we do see this deck kind of just popping up throughout the results of day 2. Overall, really solid showing. And again, when you think about it, it makes sense as to why it did good. You do have Zoroark, which can copy attacks here. You have the Darmanitan, which does basically what Radiant Greninja did. It's a little bit worse, obviously. But you're able to hit the bench, you're able to hit the active for 90. And when you have decks that need time to set up, for example, Dragapult, Gardevoir, you're able to get those early snipe KOs and just kind of take leads pretty early on. And you're basically forcing your opponent to, play the game pretty quickly. And if they can't get set up right away, then they're just going to be behind, and they're never really going to have a chance to kind of set up what they need to. But what also makes this deck pretty good is the Ends Reshiram here, because of the powerful Rage attack, which will basically do double the amount of damage that's on your Zoroark back to your opponent. So pretty much, with Dragapult, for example, which can only do 200 damage, you're able to, do return damage up to 400 damage to that Pokemon and just instantly knock it out. So Zoroark is a Pokemon that you really want to instantly knock out if you can, and if you can't, it feels really bad because you're just going to get knocked out next turn. So the Dragapult matchup, I would say, is honestly probably a little bit favored, just because Dragapult's not really able to one-shot. I do think if you play the Dusknoir, it makes it a little bit more favorable to Dragapult's. But if you're playing just pure Dragapult, this can be a very challenging matchup, just because you can't one-shot the Zoroarks, and pretty much everything else in this deck that's going to be on the board is going to be a one-prizer, with the exception of like Fezandipity. This deck plays the Bombardier, which is very interesting. I haven't seen this in any other lists, but I guess a good way to kind of get Pokemon out, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, this is pretty much a deck that you're trying to bench snipe, and with no bench barriers, you actually have a chance to do that. And you're also just doing big damage with Reshiram, and those are pretty much your only 2 attacks. I will say this deck has some matchups that they feel pretty much unwinnable, and then it also has some matchups which you just feel like you can just kind of dominate. We kind of saw the matchup play out against Ian Robb with the Flareon here, and I'm gonna be honest, it seems pretty much unwinnable for Zoroark because Flareon just one-shots Zoroark, and if you get set up pretty fast, then like you just can't knock anything out pretty much. You know, 90 to the active and 90 to the bench does nothing when everything has over 200 HP, and when you're just doing return knockouts, there's nothing you can really do, you know? So this is definitely a deck that has some really good matchups and some really bad matchups. It's definitely not like the best deck in the room, right? But it is a very solid deck that makes a lot of sense as to why it did good, especially with Gardevoir, because Gardevoir is weak to dark, so a lot of stuff's gonna knock out, so it just kind of makes sense. Going down a little bit further, we do have Aiden here playing the Roaring Moon to Dunsparce. This is actually a deck that I recently played to a local, which I did pretty bad at, but whenever I saw this deck pop up from the Monterey Regionals, I kind of thought about it and I was like, I feel like this is very solid into the meta right now, purely because of Neutralization Zone. You have a lot of decks that don't play any stadiums, a lot of decks that have pretty much just EX Pokemon as their attackers. And so with a deck like this, if you're able to kind of control the game here and you're able to kind of bump their stadiums, then you can pretty much just instantly win the game by playing the stadium. I've talked about it in other videos, but I do think that this is a very solid meta call, and it makes sense why he was able to do pretty good. We did see some other ones place pretty well into day 2, so again, just a deck that makes a lot of sense as to why it did good. I kind of want to see like what his matchups were. Kind of curious here. Ended up losing to a Dragapult, tying against a Dragapult Dusknoir, and losing to a Gardevoir actually. But aside from that, ran into a lot of Joltik Box, which I think is a very favorable matchup. And ran into some other Gardevoirs too, so overall it kind of makes sense. Scrolling down a little bit further, we do have a lot of the Raging Bolts here, which again, you know, looking at past regionals, it's a deck that hasn't been doing too well, so it is kind of cool to see it doing a lot better here into this slower format, just being able to consistently get attacks off and kind of just take a lead and just never look back. Right above that, we do have a Ceruledge, which in my opinion is not a great deck, but every now and then we'll see like one person make a run with it at a regional, and in this case we see it right here at 25th place with Joey. This is a deck that I just don't feel is that good. It's just very straightforward. It feels kind of boring to play in my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of it. You guys can let me know in the comments if you like this deck or not, but yeah, I mean, it's just pretty straightforward deck. You just want to get energies in the discard. It makes sense to play with Reverum because you're discarding energies and you're able to just draw cards. It could be annoying with Jamming Tower. You have Briar as an option here, so yeah, pretty straightforward. The other interesting deck in top 32 is actually a Charizard, which we did see again on stream here, opting to play the Chi-Yu here, which does have the Mega Fire of Envy attack, which does 50 plus 90 more if a Pokemon was knocked out. So kind of a good option for like return KOs with a single prizer. And you do also have the ability to bring fire energies back. But I've kind of been waiting to see a Charizard list just because we don't see it at all anymore. This is a really interesting build here that really has no Pidgeot, nothing like that. Instead, it has a 4/4/2 line of Duskull, which is way more than we see in a lot of other decks. So this is a deck that really utilizes that Dusknoir just to kind of set up those big combo turns, because, you know, with every prize card your opponent takes, your Charizard becomes stronger. It's kind of reliant here on the Jacq, on the Brock Scouting, Team Evolution. So using a lot of options here to not have to rely on item cards just because of Badoo. We do also have the Iron Bundle here just to kind of get things out of the active spots. But this is basically a Dusknoir deck that also utilizes Charizard. When you look at it, that's pretty much what this list is. The other interesting thing that I kind of noticed looking at the day 2 lists here is that Goldengo really didn't show out much. The highest placing one here was in 15th place with the Dragapult next to it. And if you look at all the Goldengos here, it's pretty much all Goldengo Dragapult, kind of showing that this might be the way to play the deck here. I don't think we see a pure Goldengo until, yeah, 69th. Besides that, it's all Goldengo Dragapult, so kind of showing that right now that seems to be the best way to play the deck. You do also have Rahul here in 33rd place with the Terra Box. Excited to see this deck right here. I still think it's a really solid deck. Definitely a more high skill deck as well, so one that, you know, when you're thinking about a regional and, you know, best of 3s for like 10 rounds, definitely seems kind of mentally taxing. So I can understand why you don't see it like placed too high usually, but overall still a really solid deck that just has options for every matchup. We got some more Flareon boxes here. I think that this is going to be a real deck moving forward. It's a deck that not a lot of people played, but I do think it will get more popular moving forward. We've got our first Archaludon here in 42nd place. Same as Ceruledge a little bit, it's just kind of a straightforward deck. This is the one that plays with Zoroark EX for that trade ability, being able to draw more cards. Really solid here, honestly. I think that this makes sense for the deck. The poison build is just kind of inconsistent sometimes, and a lot of times you're burning resources. So a deck like this is just kind of more straightforward, more focused on consistency, and just kind of a big Pokemon that can like survive for a long time. We've got some more Roaring Moons moving down with the, this is actually Roaring Moon EX, my bad, I was gonna say with the Dunsparce. This is a whole different deck right here. This is like the Poison Roaring Moon EX, which is kind of the only way to play the deck right now. So again, kind of a Poison Donk deck, but also with Roaring Moon EX. And overall, there's just a good mixture here of different things. We see a lot of uptick and Joltik. It makes sense. Everybody thought that this, deck was gonna be pretty popular going into this event, and of course it was. But going down a little bit further, we do have some more Roaring Moons. What I want to point out, which I did notice because I did kind of look at this ahead of time, one deck that we do have that actually made day 2 for the first time in North America, I believe, at least since rotation happened, is going to be Feraligatr. And we actually had 2 that made day 2. They didn't do too well on day 2, but they made day 2, and that's honestly pretty impressive. This one here opting to play the Genesect. Again, it makes sense. It's seen play in a lot of different decks here. I do think one of the biggest weaknesses with Feraligatr is getting like unfair stamped. So having that Genesect there to kind of prevent that can make it a lot better for you. So overall, really cool to see. We also see the redeemable ticket. That's kind of a new card in there as well. And our other Feraligatr is a little bit further down at 260th place here. This one not opting for the Genesect. This is kind of just more of the standard build here. It looks like with an extra Lana's Aid. So nothing crazy here, but just really cool to see it actually make day 2. And down here we see some other interesting decks too. We have a Mamoswine in day 2. This is a really fun deck. Another one that's just not always super consistent, but once it gets set up, it is insane. You're doing crazy damage. You just have that kind of mixture between Blaziken EX, Mamoswine, the Luxray with the reversal energies, and then Pidgeot for that search ability. The other cool mention here, of course, is the Slacking EX, which is actually going to get a little bit better moving forward. I think we're getting some cards that will actually help this deck out. I don't think this is really a good deck at all, but who knows, maybe in the future. I mean, we're seeing the Grand Tree here. So a way to kind of instantly evolve into stuff. I mean, it's got potential, I guess, It's just cool to see. We also had a couple of Hops Zacian in day 2. This is a deck that I think is just not very good. I'm going to be honest. I feel like you're just not doing enough damage. And we even had a Blissey, another deck that recently did well at an event, and unfortunately didn't do too well at this event. We only had 1 in day 2, I believe. It's just a deck that, again, it's kind of a meta call kind of deck. One of those decks where once it does good, everybody kind of knows how it works, so that surprise factor is kind of gone. But still really cool to see overall. We've even got a couple of other interesting decks here. We've got Okidogi. This is a deck that some people have played, which is a very interesting single prize deck. This is like a really interesting build here with the Legacy energy. You got the Genesect to shut off Aspex, the Munkidori to move some damage, Cleffa to draw, Ogerpon to just sit there. This is like pure Okidogi. Like everything else is just a one-of copy. It's kind of wild, honestly, not gonna lie. It's kind of a crazy deck. The other one right above it is the Gouging Fire, which has done pretty okay in like recent formats, but haven't really seen it too much, post rotation. Opting for the poison build too, which is very interesting here. So we're seeing some crazy stuff here, not gonna lie. And of course we do have a Frostlass Munkidori, which this is a deck that I do think is very solid. I do think it's a deck that most people don't want to play, and it can just be very annoying having to do all the damage counters, like especially throughout a regional. So again, I'm not surprised that we don't see a lot of this deck. This one does play the Ting Lu EX with the Cursed Land. As long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, your opponent's Pokemon in play that have any damage counters have no abilities. So this is really cool because what it does is it allows you to spread damage, but basically it makes it to where those Pokemon can't utilize those abilities. Also got the Maractus, which I think is a really good card that we're going to see in more decks, especially Dragapult. I think it's a really good card for Dragapult specifically, which we have seen in some lists, especially this past weekend. And I'm personally including it in my list. I think it's a really good card. So I do think we'll see some more of that as people start to cut like switching cards. But those are kind of the big standout decks that I kind of wanted to point out here. I guess right here we do have Greninja and Blaziken. I don't know how I missed that. This is a deck that I've kind of seen online, but I haven't really seen too much success about it. It does have the Zoroark EX here for that draw ability, but it does play a copy of the Reshiram here as well to utilize it as an attacker. And then you do of course have the Blaziken EX here to be able to accelerate some energies. You've got Greninja here, which primarily uses colorless energy, but just one water energy is needed. So it's kind of a good combination here that actually works pretty well, and you do also have Monkey Dory to spread some additional damage. But yeah, that's kind of an overview of the decks. Right here is the metagame share. It's kind of interesting to see Gardevoir really up there, kind of surpassing Dragapult, and Joltik Box being second. That's kind of surprising too. But as you can see here, Goldango did kind of fall off a little bit. I mean, I guess if you pair Goldango with Goldango Dragapult, it's actually the highest played deck, but they do have it split here because those are two pretty different builds. And I guess same thing for Dragapult and Dragapult Dusknoir. So Dragapult is technically the most played deck, Gardevoir's next. Or I guess Dragapult's the most played, then probably Goldango, and then Gardevoir. So this is like a little bit misleading. But again, the big story here is that Raging Bolt managed to win an event, and we get to see more Flareon and more Enzoroark, two decks that previously were very underplayed. So overall, really solid event. I really enjoyed it. There were some really cool matches on stream. I highly recommend you check them out if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought was most interesting about this tournament. For me, it is that Flareon in top 8. I think it's a deck that has the potential to dominate. It does have some bad matchups, but it does do pretty well into a lot of the big decks. And while you're down there, I would appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.